So today we are talking about an absolute legend from American history. The man, the myth, the legend, John Brown. A man who was deemed as a madman during his time, but who has since looked through the historical lens as almost single-handedly starting the American Civil War. And it's someone who I deeply respect as a figure. Yeah. So have you heard of John Brown?
No.
No. Okay, good.
I am kind of a pleb, very uneducated.
No. He's kind of obscure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes me feel a little better.
Yeah. Born May 9th, 1800. He's an old fucker.
Dang.
In Connecticut. Both of his grandparents actually were higher-ups in the American Revolutionary War.
Oh, okay.
His
like generals, or what do you mean?
Captains.
Oh, shit, okay.
So not exactly generals. His grandfather on his dad's side died in the American Revolutionary War. His grandfather on his mom's side survived. So, while John Brown was still very young, his father, Owen Brown, moved their family to Hudson, Ohio, which at the time was mostly wilderness still, right? The 1800s. The founder of Hudson was a man named David Hudson, and David was an abolitionist and an early advocate of forcible resistance to slavery. So, back in the day, if you were an abolitionist, you're like, peaceful, we gotta debate the slave owners. Whereas David was like, nah, fucking kill them.
Try to fuck those people.
Yeah, okay.
Let's hang down.
So, John Brown's father became a good friend of David and participated in his anti-slavery activities, including going to public debates and offering a safe house to Underground Railroad runaway slaves. This is a recurring theme in John Brown's life, where he's helping the Underground Railroad legitimately, as in having a safe place for them, and later even more, which I think is really cool, but you'll see.
Alright. I like this guy.
So at 16, John Brown left his family to travel to New England to acquire an education and become a minister. This family is very religious, and John Brown continues to be religious, and he justifies his anti-slavery through religion.
Okay, and I assume like Catholic or Christian or something
Christian,
along those lines.
I believe Protestant. So
Okay.
just normal-ass Christian. So he went to school in New England. However, he suffered from inflammation of the eyes. Which I don't think is a thing these days, where it actually is like a disability. But back then it was like a disability.
I was gonna say, so did he just have like some puffy ass eyes, or like...
He couldn't read for long periods of time. I have no idea.
Oh,
it could be a made-up illness from the 1800s. I have no idea.
I was gonna say, that just sounds like illiterate to me. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
So... it eventually became chronic, which stopped him from being able to study long periods of time, and so he dropped out of school and went back to Ohio. It was a real illness for him. I don't know what it is today.
Gotcha.
He found a wife, a woman named Deantha.
Deantha?
Yeah.
That's not a name you hear anymore.
Like Deanne, but ending with T-H-E. He had 7 children with her. 7 children with her.
I would have thought that he was Mormon.
Before dying giving birth in 1832.
Oh, fuck.
Real 1800s hours here. You just give birth a dozen times and then die.
I mean, yeah, you don't really have much else to do in the
No.
1800s, so why not?
A lot of his children died early into their lives.
Oh,
again, this is just 1800s.
Early 1800s, yeah.
So...
Thank God for modern medicine.
I know. In 1825, he had built a successful tannery business, and he even built a pretty good house for himself. And so tannery, like leather and shit.
Yeah,
but,
I figured they probably weren't like sunbathing in the 1800s.
No. So, but he was so dedicated to helping runaway slaves that he moved to New Richmond, Pennsylvania. So he had this business, he had this home, but he decided to sell it and move. Because it was a safer location for runaways. A better location in the Underground Railroad. So there, he bought 200 acres of land.
Jesus.
Yeah, back in the day, man.
That's a lot of land. He probably bought it for, what, $5-10?
Yeah.
I'd say 20 max.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nothing. Well, today, it's worth, like, $10 million at least.
Something like that. Good lord.
Where he built a house and a farm, or a barn, but his barn was secretly used to house runaways on the Underground Railroad. During this time in his life, it is estimated that Brown helped 2,500 slaves escape to Canada.
That's impressive.
That's impressive, right?
2,500 people. Yeah.
He really was a hero. And so, he was just a good-ass dude in general. In 1829, some white families in his area tried to get him to join them in kicking the natives off their land, because every year they would do, like, yearly hunting grounds. Because, the natives were nomadic. where they
Okay.
would go to different areas following the livestock, and sometimes the livestock would be in these white people's land. But John Brown refused. He called it a mean act, and he refused, and as a child, Brown actually got to know local natives, and even learn some of their language.
So, sorry to interrupt, just quick question, though. Is John hated by the white community for his beliefs and, like, how he goes about this? Because I assume, granted, with the Underground Railroad, that's completely, like, no white people know.
Yeah, most of the white people don't know, except for this new city he lives in, he went there because of the abolitionist, like, presence.
Oh,
So
okay,
he's got-
okay, so there's more of a community
Yeah.
there. Gotcha, okay.
So he's not, like, in the Deep South, where he would definitely be lynched for it. But yeah, up in these northern places, he was a member of the community. Yeah, they thought he was a madman a lot of the times, but they kind of respected him. They're like, yeah,
Gotcha.
do your thing, dude.
Cool.
So he refused to kick off the natives, and he actually invited them into his home to eat, which is just unheard of.
Nice.
And so after his first wife died, he remarried and had an additional 13 children.
Jesus, this man was busy.
7 of whom would eventually work with their father in his fight to abolish slavery. You'll see, this gets pretty crazy. So at this point...
He has a little army of 20 children.
For real, he was building an army. At this point, John Brown's life had a lot of ups and downs. He became rather wealthy, as in, like, in today's money, like, millionaire. Because of his land and the business he started up, which he worked in the wool business a lot of the time.
Okay, so when he moved, he stopped his tannery business?
Mm-hmm. And he opened a bunch of different businesses, and they kind of all succeeded, except at this point, like, the stock market went down. It was called, like, the Panic of 1829 or something like that, and so a lot of his money just disappeared, and he became severely in debt.
Okay, that kind of concerns me, though, because there's a Panic of 1829, there was the Great Depression in, the 20s, and, now we're 2023, we're going, fucking, 6 years, are we going to go into another massive depression?
Absolutely, but don't think about it.
Okay, that's something completely different. Oh god, existential dread is kicking in! Alright, we're fine.
We're fine. And so he lost all of his money. And during this time, he and 3 of his sons were expelled from their church for taking a black man into their home. So again, he's got a little community, but also, they don't like how serious he is about it.
Was somebody just, chilling in front of his house, and they're like, oh, there's a black guy going in the house. Oh, we hate that man now.
Most likely, yes.
Oh, fuck.
And so after this, John Brown never connected himself with another, official church. He was still incredibly religious, but he was just like, I'm taking a step back from that.
That's fair. Most
Yeah.
churches are kind of cults anyway.
Yeah. And so, like I said, he had tried many different businesses to get out of the debt he had accumulated. However, he never really succeeded anymore. And at this time, a very prominent abolitionist writer named Elijah Lovejoy was murdered for his activities. It was a very famous case of this guy who was a writer and a speaker, and he had been essentially lynched in the streets of some southern city. Yeah.
Okay.
For his activities.
But we don't know what city. Just somewhere in the south.
I'm sure we do. I just didn't look.
Okay. No worries.
So Lovejoy became sort of a martyr for the cause, and Brown publicly vowed at this time, quote, here, he's very dramatic, quote, here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery.
Dude, what beautiful language, though. Granted, isn't that just kind of how they talked in the 1800s?
Yeah, but he's again, he is kind of a madman. Like, he's just kind of unhinged a little bit. But
respect, though.
He's unhinged in the right ways.
I was going to say, you kind of have to be a little bit crazy to be able to go against the grain.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I like it.
So, at this point, Brown moved with his family to Springfield, Massachusetts, again as a means for helping emancipate slaves. He moves literally just to go to the best place where he could help the most slaves. And in Springfield, John Brown became involved with the local abolitionist activities, and through this, he met Frederick Douglass. He met Frederick Douglass, he met Harriet Tubman. All of these people respected him. Frederick Douglass thought he was a madman. He was like, you gotta tone it down a bit. But also, they respected him, right?
Nice.
And so, Douglass stated, quote, John Brown's zeal in the cause of freedom was infinitely superior to mine. Mine was of the taper light. His was as the burning sun. I could speak for the slave. John Brown could fight for the slave. So again, these people, they're just like, real dude.
Yeah.
He's real.
They have true respect for him.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So in 1850, the U.S. passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which was a law mandating the return of escaped slaves and imposed penalties on those who harbored the escaped slaves, even in the North. So everywhere in the country, if you find an escaped slave, you have to bring them back to the South, or you're getting a punishment.
Gotcha.
And this really pissed off abolitionists, just like as a side tangent. It kind of led to the Civil War, most likely, other than John Brown. But yeah, so people were pissed off. And in response to this, John Brown formed a militant group named the League of Gileadites. Gilead is like a thing from the Bible where some dude helped the Jewish people escape Egypt or something like that.
Okay.
But it's a Bible thing.
Gotcha.
So he formed the League of Gileadites, who would aid slaves in their escape with heat, like guns, swords. If you came to them as a slave, they were going to help you.
Yeah, you were going to get armed and fucking ready for battle.
Yeah.
I love it.
And after the founding of the League of Gileadites, not one person was taken back into slavery from Springfield. So he had that shit on lock. Exactly.
Damn.
So now, this was all kind of weak shit for John Brown. We're about to get into where he went absolutely ham.
Okay.
So, Kansas. So Kansas from 1854 to 1860 was named Bleeding Kansas. And this is because during this time, if a new territory was allowed to become a state, because it was just like the Kansas Territory, and then they had their own government, and they're like, the federal government's like, okay, you can be a state. Mm-hmm. So during this process, there was a vote to have it be a free state, or a slave state.
Okay.
Just a vote, right? And this led to immense bloodshed and immense chaos, because if Kansas was left alone to its native population, the white people, right? If they were left alone to that, it would have been voted as a free state. Like, historians kind of note this, that if the election was gone untampered with, it would have been a free state. But what this meant is that Southerners from Mississippi and Missouri all went into Kansas with heat to try and get it to be a slave state. And this is really important because, like, the states were at a deadlock between slave and non-slave states. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if it was a slave state, that's bigger power in Congress, bigger power in the Senate to continue slavery. And so, because the Southerners went in there, the hardcore abolitionists like John Brown were also like, fuck that shit, I'm going in too. And so in 1856, pro-slavery forces began a campaign of violence and sacked the free city of Lawrence, killing and burning buildings and all that. And John Brown, when he heard what was going on, loaded up with 7 of his adult sons. Like, he was really building an army here.
Seriously, dude.
And a wagon full of weapons and ammo. And he left for Kansas, where he eventually became the leader of the anti-slavery forces there. And so, this is kind of controversial what he does here, but in search of revenge for the sacking of that town, Brown and his sons besieged the house of the leaders of the raiding, escorted them out into the darkness, where Owen Brown, his son, and Owen Brown's brother, Frederick, killed them with broadswords. They have guns, but they were just like, you helped with this raid? Come out here.
Damn.
Hacked them apart with broadswords.
Yeah, I was going to say, it probably wasn't like a clean executioner style either. It was, definitely.
It was hacked apart. Ooh. And that's why it gets a little controversial whether or not this should have been done, but people at the time, John Brown has said, like, no, all these people are fucking cowards. Like, we need action, and he's going to go do it.
Granted, it is really fucked up, but when you're talking about a situation like that, you kind of have to send a message.
Yep.
Like, as fucked up as it is, and granted, people shouldn't be hacked apart. That probably isn't, good mojo all in all. But, if you really want to send a message, that's how you're going to fucking do it. Right? Cartel took notes there.
Yeah. And so, at times, they would go to another leader's house, and he would have his wife and his children there, and they wouldn't kill the wife or child unless the child was old enough and participated. Then they would kill the child too. But they would just be like, you come here, take him into the woods, hack him apart. For what it's worth, John Brown didn't do the hacking, but he shot one of them in the head to make sure he was dead, and then he said, I approved of it.
At that point, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. And you're in it, you might as well just take ownership of it. Like, come on, dude.
So, and during this whole time, they're leading battles, literally battles, and John Brown, his sons, and his other followers, because it wasn't just him and his sons, he had other followers, were repelling the pro-slavery forces out of Kansas. They were kind of just beating the shit out of the pro-slavery forces for a while there. But then, in August, a company of over 300 Missourians, most of these people came from Missouri, 300 Missourians under the command of General John W. Reed crossed into Kansas and headed towards Osawatomie. And I didn't say it, but him going to the houses and killing people was called the Osawatomie Massacre.
Huh, okay.
But they intended to destroy the Free State settlements there and then march to the other cities and do the same thing. Like, it was a whole war going on.
Yeah, straight war. All right.
And Brown, outnumbered more than 7-1, arranged his 38 men behind natural defenses along the road. Firing from cover, they managed to kill at least 20 of Reed's men and wounded 40 more. They were doing, like, guerrilla warfare. Reed regrouped, ordered his men to dismount and charge into the woods, and Brown's small group scattered and fled across the river. And one of Brown's men was killed during the retreat, and 4 were captured, while Brown and his surviving men hid in the woods nearby. The Missourians then swept through and plundered the whole state. So he eventually lost this war. He was dealing with outnumbered forces.
I mean, still respect, though.
Oh, like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so despite his defeat, Brown's bravery and military shrewdness in the face of overwhelming odds brought him national attention and made him a hero to many northern abolitionists. So again, he was getting more and more attention for being a dude who actually does shit.
Right, actually get shit done. Good for him.
And so after the government of Kansas finally got a hold of all the violence and were just like, okay, you guys stop, we'll pardon everybody, it's like nothing happened, just stop. And it actually stopped. So John Brown then planned a major attack on slavery. In fact, he had been planning for decades. He had talked to generals from Europe, from like the French Civil War and shit like that. He was getting plans for his new attack on the South, right?
How does he even get in contact with these people? Like, man, man's got connections.
His main dude actually came to America, and he hired him as like a strategy guy.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was seriously planning like a war.
And I was going to follow up. So you were saying that this is after pardons went out? Mm-hmm. Okay, so
he's free.
Yeah, John Brown is free.
Yep.
Right, okay. But then he was like, fuck that. And this isn't any type of civil discourse anymore. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, I don't give a fuck. We're going back in. We're going to murder all these motherfuckers.
Exactly.
Okay, just making sure we're on the same page. Gotcha.
He never stops. He never stopped.
Man with the mission.
Yeah. So, as put by Frederick Douglass at this time, quote, his own statement that he had been contemplating a bold strike for the freedom of the slaves for 10 years proves that he had resolved upon his present course long before he or his sons ever set foot in Kansas. So he was already planning this thing, and Kansas went off, and he was just like, let's do it here. But he's got more planned. So according to his first biographer, James Redpath, quote, for 30 years he secretly cherished the idea of being the leader of a servile insurrection, the American Moses, predestined by omnipotence to lead the servile nations in our southern states to freedom. Yeah, it's
strong wording.
Yeah. An acquaintance said, quote, as Moses was raised up and chosen by God to deliver the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, he was fully convinced in his own mind that he was to be the instrument in the hands of God to effect the emancipation of the slaves. So again, it's just he thinks of himself as like a crusader against slavery.
Okay, I was going to ask, how much is he tying God into all of this? Like,
everything. He uses the Bible to justify there not being... I mean, in the Bible, there are things that are, slavery's bad. So, like, he's using that. He was brought up in this extremely religious household, but also an extremely abolitionist household. And he just kind of took that to the next step.
Gotcha. Did he end up having, like, a messiah complex?
Not that I know of, but people say he did. Again, he's not actually insane. You'll get quotes from him directly soon.
I feel like my man's bordering, though. Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, respect what he did overall. Good cause, right? But he definitely is leaning on the side of insanity a little bit. Yeah. Right?
No, he's intense. He's definitely... He's the more dedicated out of anyone at this time period, like,
gotcha.
At least.
Yeah.
He's definitely unhinged a bit. So, his plan was to begin an insurrection against slaveholders, which in turn he hoped would inspire slaves across the southern plantations to pick up arms and fight them for themselves, creating a snowball effect of slaves emancipating themselves. So his plan was to go throughout the South, liberate one plantation, get the slaves who wanted to fight with him, go to the next plantation, get those slaves, fight with him, go to the next plantation, right? Mm-hmm. And the general he actually got for the plans, to get these plans with him, eventually was like, this isn't going to work. You can't expect non-fighters to become fighters. He's like, the slaves aren't soldiers. You know what I mean? That was his point. He was like, John Brown's going to fail. And eventually this fucking guy, went to the government and told them John Brown's plans and was like,
Why?
he's going to lead an insurrection. He's a douchebag, I don't know.
Damn.
But yeah, he told them all this, and so John Brown had to forego this plan for like a few years. He had to go deal with it. He's like, no, this guy just doesn't like me, and nothing happened to him then. But because of this, he had a lot more people ready to go with him.
And was the person who ratted him out the same general, like the strategist?
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Yeah.
Okay, damn.
And so it kind of fucked up his whole plan because he had a lot more people, volunteers willing to go with him, and by the time he finally got this figured out, he lost a lot of them.
Gotcha.
So his target was Harper's Ferry Armory in Virginia. And so during this time, he had met with many abolitionist leaders, including Harriet Tubman, who found him several runaway slaves from Canada who would join him in the raid. So Harriet Tubman actually supplied him with soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Many other abolitionists, such as Frederick Douglass, tried to stop the raid because they saw it as a suicide mission, but they couldn't persuade John Brown. So yeah, Douglass was also like, this isn't going to work, but he's not going to go rat him out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And so, this is the premier event of his life. On October 16th, 1859, he's 59 years old, by the way, he's an old man. Brown led 18 men into an attack on the Harper's Ferry Armory. He left a few behind. He had more than 18. He had like 20-something, but he took 18 with him.
That's kind of a small squad.
Yeah.
Okay.
He didn't think he needed a large armory. He had hundreds of pikes that he ordered. Spears. Short spears, yeah. And he also had a bunch of guns and a bunch of ammo. Like, his plan was to not have a bunch of soldiers, kind of do this covertly and get soldiers as he goes.
Okay, so he was just trying to supply for future people that he plans on recruiting.
He wants the slaves to emancipate themselves, pretty much.
Oh, okay, and he just wants to be able to provide the means.
Yep.
Okay.
And so that's why he went to Harper's Ferry, because it was the largest armory in the United States. They had thousands of weapons, millions of rounds of ammo. He was
Damn.
like, we're going to go take this over, and then we can hand it out to people.
Yeah.
And so what's actually interesting is, though, he and his men had Sharps rifles, which is the real-world version of a Sparks.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
How cool.
So he was running in with Sparks and pikes. And the armory had a large complex of buildings that contained 100,000 muskets and rifles, which Brown planned to seize and use to arm local slaves. They would then head south, drawing off more and more slaves from plantations and fighting only in self-defense. As Douglass and Brown's family testified, his strategy was essentially to deplete Virginia of its slaves, causing the institution to collapse in one county after another, until the movement spread into the South, wreaking havoc on the economic viability of the pro-slavery estates. He's kind of trying to create chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is not unheard of. Like in Haiti, before this time, they had their own revolution where the actual slaves just rose up and killed all their masters just out of nowhere. And it just created chaos, and the French came in and killed them all. Very sad story, but
Oh, shit.
that's why America was terrified of slaves talking to one another, so they weren't allowed to travel. You know, you couldn't travel between plantations as a slave, pretty much, because if you were spreading the message, because the masters knew they were outnumbered. If the slaves
If they decided to have an uprising.
Yeah. And so initially the raid went well, and they met no resistance entering the town. John Brown's raiders cut the telegraph wires and easily captured the armory, which was being defended by a single watchman.
I bet the dude just saw it and it was like, he had his gun, he was just sitting there enjoying his time. He saw the party roll up and he was like, nah,
Yeah.
I'm good. Enter.
Yeah, for real. So they next rounded up hostages from nearby farms, including the great-grandnephew of George Washington, just as a side note.
Okay.
They also spread the news to the local slaves that their liberation was at hand. They just, like, sent messengers, you know.
Okay.
News of the raid reached Baltimore early that morning and Washington by late morning. So they cut the power lines or the telegram lines, but news spread way too quick. And they were kind of hoping that news would be delayed.
Gotcha.
In the meantime, though, local farmers, shopkeepers, and militia pinned down the raiders in the armory by firing from the heights behind the town. So
the town itself was starting to fight back.
So you know how there's like 3%ers and local militias everywhere, like American militias who are like, we're going to fight against tyranny and shit? Well,
yeah.
This is what militias are actually for. They're for putting down slave uprisings. That's just how they have been for historically.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the militia worked. They went in and they stopped this potential slave uprising.
Gotcha.
So Some of the local men were shot by Brown's men. At noon, a company of militia seized the bridge, blocking the only escape route. Brown then moved his prisoners and remaining raiders into the fire engine house, a small brick building at the armory's entrance. He had the doors and windows barred and loopholes cut through the brick walls so they could shoot out. The surrounding forces barraged the engine house, and the men inside fired back with occasional fury. Brown sent his son Watson and another supporter out under a white flag, but the angry crowd shot them.
Ooh.
He watched his son get gunned down, yeah.
Damn.
Trying to surrender. Intermittent shooting then broke out, and Brown's son Oliver was wounded. His son begged his father to kill him and end his suffering, but Brown said, quote, "If you must die, die like a man."
Don't be a bitch, son. You're bleeding out. I don't give a fuck. Don't be a bitch.
He didn't have.
Oh god.
He didn't have much care for his son's lives, but to be
I
fair,
mean, when you have 20 kids, though, how much love in
true.
between all of them?
like a dozen have already died, and
Oh god.
just in childhood. But also, if you're that religious and you think you're fighting for God's will, I don't think you care if you're gonna die.
I still think that it's kind of fucked up. You just sent one of your sons to go get gunned down in the middle of the road, then the other one is like dying right next to you, and you're just like, son, stop being such a little bitch, man. Like, just fucking die, dude.
I know.
Like, oh my god.
I know.
A little unhinged.
Yep. To be fair, though, he never forced his sons to join him. Much of his family didn't join him. These were just the sons that were like, we'll do it with you.
I feel like you would have even more respect for them.
Yeah.
Being like, man, you know, my own blood trying to fight for my cause, right? To try and help all these people, and, you know, just doesn't even fucking care.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brutal, man.
It's like the definition of conditional love.
Okay. By the morning of October 18th, the engine house, later known as John Brown's Fort, was surrounded by a company of U.S. Marines under the command of First Lieutenant Israel Green and Colonel Robert E. Lee of the United States Army. The lieutenant approached under a white flag and told the raiders their lives would be spared if they surrendered. Brown refused, saying, "No, I prefer to die here." Stewart then gave a signal. The Marines used sledgehammers and a makeshift battering ram to break down the engine room door. Lieutenant Green cornered Brown and struck him several times, wounding his head. In 3 minutes, Brown and the survivors were captives.
Oh, okay, so they didn't just go in there and gun everyone down. They kept them as prisoners.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't so bad for them, I guess, but... So on November 2nd, after a week-long trial and 45 minutes of deliberation, the Charlestown jury found Brown guilty in all 3 counts. He was sentenced to be hanged in public on December 2nd. So, at the time, this was... the armory was on federal land. It's a military armory, so it's federal land, right?
Okay.
And so, by all accounts, he should have been tried in a federal court. But the president and the governor of Virginia was like, "No, we want to try him in the state." Because there was no federal law against murder. There was no federal law against capturing, because these things didn't happen on federal land yet. It's still early. So,
I mean,
long
okay.
story short, they made him get tried in the state, and people were pissed off about that.
Gotcha.
But anyways, in the trial, he stated, quote, "Had I so interfered in behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or in behalf of their friends, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, every man in this court would have deemed it worthy of reward rather than punishment. If it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done."
So just straight accepting his fate.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you know, fuck you guys, I'm going to die for my cause. I will die on this hill.
Exactly.
Respect.
So, under Virginia law, a month had to elapse before the death sentence could be carried out. And so Governor Wise resisted pressures to move up the execution date. Again, this is a slave state. People wanted him dead immediately.
Yeah.
General Wise resisted pressures to move up the execution date because he said he wanted everyone to see that Brown's rights had been thoroughly respected. And Brown made it clear repeatedly in his letters and conversations that these were the happiest days of his life. Being captured, going to be executed.
Because he knew that he was dying for his cause.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He would be publicly murdered, as he put it, but he was an old man, and he said near death anyway. Brown was politically shrewd and realized his execution would strike a massive blow against slave power, a greater blow than he had made so far out of so far or had prospects of making otherwise. His death now had a purpose. In the meantime, the death sentence allowed him to publicize his anti-slavery views through the reporters constantly present in his cell and through his voluminous correspondence. So yeah, he's also getting his message out. This is like how he thinks he's going to free the slaves, essentially.
Yeah.
Through his own sacrifice. And so Brown said several times that he did not want to be rescued. So people could have actually rescued him.
Like, just straight broke him out of prison.
Yeah, and so he refused the assistance of Silas Sewell, a friend from Kansas who infiltrated the Jefferson County Jail one day by getting himself arrested for drunken brawling, and offered to break him out during the night and flee northward to New York State and possibly Canada. So he was there. He was going to break him out.
Like, he had the option to leave if he wanted to.
Yep. Brown told Silas that aged 59, he was too old to live a life on the run from the federal authorities as a fugitive and wanted to accept his execution as a martyr for the abolitionist cause. As Brown wrote his wife and children from jail, he believed that his blood will do vastly more towards advancing the cause I have earnestly endeavored to promote than all I have done in my life before. I am worth inconceivably more to hang than for any other purpose. So yeah, he just wants to die.
Respect.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, this guy goes fucking hard. So on December 1st, Brown's wife arrived by train in Charlestown, where she joined him at the county jail for his last meal. She was denied permission to stay the night, prompting Brown to lose his composure and temper for the only time during the ordeal. Brown made his will. Brown was well read and knew that the last words of prominent people are valued. So, on the morning of December 2nd, 1859, Brown wrote and gave to his jailer the words he wanted to be remembered by, which are now seen as a prediction of the Civil War to come. He said, quote, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done. So he was saying, I didn't try and... He's saying, I thought I could free the slaves without that much bloodshed. As in, he could get the slaves to free themselves, maybe kill their masters, but it wouldn't be a full-on civil war.
Yeah.
But he said, I realize now that there has to be a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah, for actual change to end up going.
And he was completely right.
Right. Damn.
So John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was amongst the last in a series of events that led to the American Civil War. Southern slave owners, hearing initial reports that hundreds of abolitionists were involved, were relieved the effort was so small, but feared other abolitionists would emulate Brown and attempt to lead slave rebellions. Future Confederate President Jefferson Davis feared thousands of John Browns. Therefore, the South reorganized a decrepit militia system, which eventually became the Confederate Army.
How long after John Brown's death was the Civil War?
The Civil War started in 1861. He died in December of 59. So it was less than 2 years after he was executed. And so, Brown was successful in polarizing politics. Brown's raid succeeded, quote, Brown's raid succeeded brilliantly. It drove a wedge through the already tentative and fragile coalition and helped to intensify the sectional polarization that soon tore the Union apart. So again, he started the Civil War.
He was catalyst for all of this.
He was the spark, yeah. Many abolitionists in the North viewed Brown as a martyr, sacrificed for the sins of the nation. Immediately after the raid, William Lloyd Garrison, which is a very famous political writer guy, published a column in The Liberator judging Brown's raid, quote, well-intended but sadly misguided, and wild and futile. However, he defended Brown's character from detractors in the Northern and Southern press and argued that those who supported the principles of the American Revolution could not consistently oppose Brown's raid. On the day Brown was hanged, Garrison reiterated the point in Boston, quote, whenever commenced, I cannot but wish success to all slave insurrections. And so that's the story of John Brown. So again, in history, for over 100 years, especially through the ending of the Civil Rights Movement, when black people were still second-class citizens, everyone believed John Brown was a maniac. Yeah. Just a crazy guy who...
Because he's going against the grain.
Yeah, he fucked everything up. But nowadays, historians are like, no, he succeeded, and he sacrificed his life, and his whole life was dedicated to helping the slaves, from the Underground Railroad, leaving a prosperous business and his own house that he literally built, to just go help slaves more.
Wow. Incredible, man.
He is a hero. I'll show you a picture of him. He's ugly.
Damn.
Yeah. But that was John Brown, and I really respect him, and I think Malcolm X, who is another one of my favorite historical figures, also says, he has a really great quote that's like, if a white person wants to be an ally to the black people, ask what... And this was when John Brown was still considered crazy, because it was in the 60s. He was like, ask them what they think of John Brown, because John Brown was a hero.
Damn.
Yeah, and Malcolm X doesn't say that about any white people.
Yeah.
Not at all. So yeah, that was John Brown. What'd you think?
Holy shit. I honestly did not know his story. Got chills a couple times.
Yeah.
Just kind of listening to that. Yeah, incredible, man.
Incredible.
I mean, the amount of just courage and dedication that it takes to be able to do what he did, to just be able to help a great cause is amazing.
As a white guy, too.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, because he had no skin in the game.
Right?
Yeah.
And he just wanted to do good by by people.
By Jesus.
Yeah. And just be a good person. Definitely handled a few situations, a little rough, but, he got his point across. He got his message across, and it seems like he was successful, so fucking good on him.
Yeah. The fucking broadswords kills me. Dude.
Yeah.
They've got real rifles, but they're like, whoosh, whoosh.
Bit savage.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, 100% just sending a message.
Yeah. Alright, let us know if you want to hear more history stuff. I've got a lot of cool stories I could share. If it's kind of boring, maybe it's kind of boring. I don't know. It's not a mystery. There are some historical mysteries we could talk about. Maybe we'll get into that later, but
I mean, John Brown's a fucking legend.
He is a legend.
Like, my God.
Oh! I've almost forgot.
Huh.
The Union soldiers. So... There's a very famous song that they sang called, like, the hymn of something. But it's this very famous song in the Civil War where they sing, glory, glory, hallelujah, and they're all, like, marching and all that. But what people don't know is that originally the song they sang was about John Brown.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. And that's the song they would sing as they marched.
How cool.
I'll put it in the video at the end if it's not copyrighted. Alright,
Awesome.
See you next time.
Deuces.